You're listening to the Business Club for Grown-Ups podcast with Jessica Fearnley. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Business Club for Grown-Ups podcast with me, Jessica Fearnley. Today we have a fantastic topic that I'm really excited to share with you. I've had some lovely messages over the last month from women who've really enjoyed listening to the podcast and have found it helpful in thinking differently about their business and starting to tackle some of the problems that they're up against. And that gives me a huge boost, so thank you for your feedback. If you've enjoyed the podcast, I'd love it if you left a review for us on iTunes. I'd love to connect with you as well, so if you head to my website, jessicafearnley.com, you can find all my social media channels linked in the footer of each page. And if you want to get notified when the latest episode drops, you can subscribe on iTunes or directly on my website. If you go to jessicafearnley.com/podcast, you can sign up to receive an email notification to let you know there's a new episode ready and waiting for you. So don't forget to do that if you'd like to stay up to date with what's happening here in the podcast. Now, I said just now that we have a great topic for you today, so let's get cracking with our content. We're exploring the traits that make you a terrible employee but an excellent entrepreneur. And I don't know if straight away you just think, yes, that so describes the exact journey that you've been on, because I think that was very much my experience. I've always been a bit of a quirky person, a little bit of a misfit. I have this unusual sense of humour, and I am actually very bright. But I constantly have this flood of things to say in any given situation that would just be completely inappropriate or completely hilarious, depending on your point of view. So I stand out, or maybe stick out, without really trying. It comes very naturally to me to be like that. But I think that did make my early life kind of a challenge. So at school I was pretty near the top of the class without trying very hard, which by the way is a bit of a curse because it can make you very lazy and actually really frustrated when you find there's something that you can't do. It can lead to real shortcomings in character, I really do think that, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, I think I realised when I was a teenager that being clever and getting good marks and doing it without really breaking a sweat doesn't really endear you to people. So you get called names like swot or geek, and that didn't happen to me loads, but I think you do pick up this sense of like, people don't really like it, that I'm like this. I was often really eager to please my teachers as well, so I was actually a bit of a teacher's pet, to be honest. But when that causes a negative response from your peers, you learn, don't you? You learn quite quickly to wind your neck back in and stop standing out. Go for the B grade, not the A grade. Sparkle a little bit less because it makes other people feel bad about themselves or makes them feel frustrated that you're dominating everything all the time. And part of that's good. School is great for rubbing off our corners and teaching us how to get on with everyone else. But I also found myself doing that in the workplace. I had several jobs where I realised very quickly I had way more capacity to do the work than my role would actually allow for. And I got told once to work slower or I'd do myself out of a job. Isn't that an insane thing to say to someone? Can you just be a little less good at what you're doing because it's not really in keeping with the level we need from our staff? And I think it's something I've seen women do a lot. You know, downplaying the things they're good at, particularly if they're in a male-dominated workplace. Just pretend they don't understand something they actually do, or make out that they're only really interested in shoes or hair straighteners because that's safe and non-threatening. Sometimes it's something women do because of a lack of confidence, and they genuinely can't see how fantastically skilled they are, but often it's learned behaviour and it's something that might be done subconsciously, but it comes from this message that women shouldn't achieve their potential. And I don't think it's unique to women, of course it's not. Corporate employment often requires men and women to just fit in the box, to be the same as everyone else or to fit a profile that they might have drawn up for a particular role. There are a ton of courses and coaches in the corporate space to help people to fit in better to the corporate environment so they can get ahead. And yes, of course it's more complex than that, but on the whole, a corporate career is a struggle if you're someone who doesn't naturally fit in, or if you have a skill set or personality that isn't type A. So all this actually became a huge surprise to me when I set up my own business and started learning about building a personal brand, which again is something I've rebelled against a little bit because I'm not someone who has like a public figure Facebook page or who has a life goal to become Instagram famous, but my business is very much built around me as a person. Because when people work with me, they get me, and they need to have an inkling about what that looks like before we work together. So when you start a business that's based around a personal brand, suddenly you're like, oh no, I've spent my life trying to make myself the same as everyone else, and now you're telling me I need a USP. What am I supposed to do about that? And so the process of becoming an entrepreneur has been very much, firstly, noticing wow, that is actually what my life has been about up to this point. I'm an orange in a world of apples. I've always known that about myself, but this is actually the first time I felt like it was an advantage. And for me, that's why this is a topic I'm so passionate about, because since I set up my business and started to embrace this whole entrepreneur thing, which by the way took quite a long time to get comfortable with, because entrepreneur has not been a term that felt natural to me at all, but I think I'm now actually at a point where I'm okay with it at last. But since I started my business and have started to build a personal brand, I've realised that this is something I'm actually very naturally suited to, and I wonder if that's true for you too. I don't fit in very easily in a corporate workplace. Everything about it is wrong for me. I hate wearing the same clothes as everyone else. I hate dressing up smart and wearing uncomfortable clothes and shoes. I hate doing long hours in an office away from home. I'd much rather wear tracksuit bottoms and a cable knit sweater with my MacBook on my kitchen table or the sofa or wherever feels comfortable to me in that moment. I hate trying to be the same as everyone else because I'm not. I'm opinionated. I like to set the pace and work in line with my personal values and take action when things aren't working. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I'm titling this episode The Things That Make You a Terrible Employee. And it's not like I was a terrible employee. In lots of ways, I was a great employee in all the corporate jobs I had. But I was never really very happy in that environment. And I always found it a very frustrating environment. It just doesn't suit my personality at all. And when I look back, it's so clear to me that when I had corporate jobs, I was trying to be someone that actually I'm just not. And conversely, being a self-employed entrepreneur who works from home suits me so well. The job I do now as a business coach, there just wasn't a category for that when I was a student going to careers fairs. And that's probably fine because I wouldn't have had the business experience I do without having worked in project management and business development in my career. But when I look back on my life to this point, my 20s were all about trying to do things properly, so getting my degrees, doing the corporate thing in London like everyone else, transitioning from this quite rebellious teenager, because I was a goth, by the way. I don't talk about it loads, but I do sort of love to tell people that these days, as now I'm a vicar's wife. No one really ever expects me to say that. But transitioning from this rebellious teenager to someone who did things properly. If someone had said to me when I was 21, oh hey, you should totally become a business coach and be self-employed because it would just suit you down to the ground, I don't know, I feel like I had to go through that phase in my 20s of feeling very other and like a bit of a misfit. But putting myself in that situation where I was at least trying to fit in, it's been very much a case of playing the long game, but I think it is important that I had that experience. And I feel that with one of my sons, now as a mum actually, because he has a very similar personality to me. He's deeply imaginative, he's frustratingly stubborn. That boy is an entrepreneur, and it's really challenged me a lot to think, even in just 4 years of being a parent, do I embrace that part of his personality and set him on a lifelong track to being different? Or should I encourage him to learn how to fit in? And honestly, I just don't know. But I haven't ruled out teaching him to build pages on my website when he's a bit older. But it's hilarious. At his school, they're doing computer skills, and they sent home a letter saying that the children all need to work on their mouse control. And my husband and I both have Macs. I know people get all silly about Macs, and I'm not trying to be a snob, but we don't have a desktop computer. We both have MacBooks because we both work flexibly. And we don't even have a mouse at home. So now I'm thinking, is he learning skills that are ever going to be any use to him? But to be honest, he's allowed to do whatever he likes when he's older. If he says he wants to be an accountant or a city trader or something completely different to what I've done, I am 100% happy for him to set that course for himself. So that's a slightly long preamble to give you a bit of an outline as to why I think this is a really relevant topic for you if you're a female entrepreneur. So often I think we can go through our businesses with this dominant narrative of, I'm not really very good at anything. Especially if, like me, you feel like you failed a bit at corporate employment. Because while I was a good employee in lots of ways, the fact that I went through burnout did really make me feel like I'd failed in such a huge way at having a corporate career. But that was nearly 9 years ago, and I think now I have a bit more distance with it. I can see that in lots of ways, of course it didn't work for me in the corporate workplace, because in my DNA practically, I am an entrepreneur. Everything about my character just shouts it out, and I've had to work hard in some areas to overcome the obstacles I've put in the path of building my business. So for me, that has been a major lack of confidence and a lack of ability to see myself as I actually am. For example, someone who actually has skills at anything as opposed to being rubbish at everything, which for a long time was my dominant narrative. I've had to work hard at overcoming these things. But as I've grown in confidence and realised that things about my current work that I never would have said that I'd enjoy, like Facebook Live or podcasting, they've just felt so natural and instinctive, and it's all added up to me realising that actually I am an entrepreneur. I've said it. So of course it didn't work for me in corporate because I'm not meant to be the same as everyone else, and that isn't how my character is anyway. So instead of that frustration that comes from trying to minimise certain aspects of your character, I'm so much more fulfilled now I have my own business. So why am I sharing all of this with you? Well, because I wonder if that's actually true for you as well. It might be that you have a completely different personality to me, but at the same time, you've also felt that frustration or even failure at corporate employment, and you're just starting to realise that you're perfectly designed for running your own business. And it's important to clarify with this kind of topic that there are reasons you can fail at corporate employment that aren't that blessing in disguise type of thing. You know, if you just can't get on with anyone, or you punch your boss or steal money from your employer or that kind of thing. I'm not talking about that. But here's a rundown of the traits that I found were a real pain in the backside when I was in corporate, but have been a major advantage in my entrepreneurial life. I'd be really interested to hear if you found the same thing, or if you have a totally different set of traits that have hindered you in corporate but really helped in your business. It's all about rediscovering those things about ourselves and realising they can really serve us. And more than that, realising that they equip us perfectly for building a business. So first of all, like I've already said, I've never felt I was really like other people, and this did feel like a major disadvantage in the workplace. But now I'm an entrepreneur building my own business, it really is such an advantage. I have really strong ideas about basically everything, which again was basically a nightmare in corporate because I was never really that good at going with the flow and all those other annoying things that in all honesty I still find a bit baffling, because when I commit to something I'm so passionate I just want to give it 100%, and there are very few work situations that I'm indifferent to, or I just think, okay, I'm not very invested in the outcome of that. And I think that's one of the reasons that business coaching really suits me, because if I'm working with a client, their success is my key priority. They get 100% of my energy and support because I'm bothered by the outcome. And if there are things that don't work, I can't bear it if they remain unaddressed. In one job that I had, there were some major performance issues with a particular member of staff who just behaved awfully, and it was such a hindrance to the productivity of the team. But none of the managers wanted to deal with it and just said, oh, you know, it's really sensitive, and tried to pretend that it wasn't happening. But meanwhile, the issue stays exactly the same, and I can't bear that as a dynamic. Now I run my own business, it's a really helpful trait, because if there's a problem, I know that it needs to be dealt with. And when you're building a business, it's actually really great to be bold enough to tackle things head on sometimes. It is kind of funny though, because all these things feel differently when you're the one making the decisions. So I think a big part of it is that I've never been that comfortable being an employee or a junior. I've probably always wanted to be the boss, but I don't think I ever realised that about myself until I set up my business. I've never been very good at having a boss. I really like being autonomous, and it does feel different when you're the one in charge all of a sudden. I remember in the early days of my business suddenly quite missing having a boss, because I realised I'd never really had to take responsibility for things very fully before, and that had been the thing that had been a big frustration, because I am a very independent person and I feel very strongly about a lot of things, and yet it did feel pretty overwhelming to suddenly have to make decisions all the time, sometimes about really trivial things like business card designs, which is one of those things, isn't it? It doesn't matter, but at the same time it matters hugely because it's the first thing that people see, and you can just go round and round in circles for ages trying to get your head around. But also about more complicated issues of how to handle certain dynamics with prospective clients or joint venture partners. There are just lots of things to decide all the time. I have a very analytical mind, and I'm always interested in finding the best way to do something. So in a typical scenario where I was being given instructions by a manager, I would usually be mentally building up a list of reasons why a certain approach was flawed and troubleshooting that to find a better solution. And I remember one situation in a company where we had peer line management, which for the record I don't think was a great fit for anyone in the company. But my manager, who was slightly younger than me, asked me to do a task and told me how to do it. And without thinking, I just said, oh hey, instead of doing it like this, why don't we just do it like this? That would be better and it would be faster. And there was a pause, and she said, or you could just do it the way I asked you. And I realised actually when I do that it's frustrating for her, and I think it was the first time I realised that there was an expectation on me to follow the orders of my line manager. And just the fact that A, I had to realise that, and B, I knew straight away I didn't like it, it now kind of makes me laugh because I am such an entrepreneur, and that initiative and inquiring mind, those are some of the traits that make me good at being a coach now, because they equip me to help my clients and pinpoint the root of problems they're facing. But they felt like major hindrances when I was trying to get by in corporate. And there's something there about leadership, isn't there? I think that's been one of the biggest realizations for me since I set up my business, that all through my life I've been looking for a leadership role, but like many girls, that was labelled as bossiness when I was a child and very much something bad. And I was handicapped by this huge lack of confidence throughout the first part of my life, and this belief that my opinion or my idea on how to do something would always be wrong. Because it's those things, isn't it? When you have a boss who wants to double check everything you do, and then you write an email and they want you to reword a sentence here or a sentence there, and then suddenly it becomes this huge belief that you need someone to sense check everything you do or say because you actually can't trust yourself to do the right thing. That's been a huge learning point for me, actually. I can write an email, I can negotiate or have a difficult conversation without someone double checking that I'm not doing it wrong. And it's so liberating when you're dependent on a manager to keep you within the lines, or you feel like you can't make decisions on your own. That's a really exhausting state of mind to be in all the time. So it's really helped me to learn that firstly, I can trust my own instincts, and they're often bang on. And secondly, a big part of running a business is to do with leadership, and I think it really helps to remember that. So what are some of the traits I think are really good for entrepreneurs to excel in? Well, firstly, you need to be good at building relationships, because so much of building a successful business hinges on the quality of relationships you have in your network. And that's true of the corporate world as well, but it can be so easy to sit safely inside your little team or little department when you're in a corporate job and see all the other teams as enemies or not really relevant to what you're doing. But when you're a solopreneur, the quality of your contacts is just so important to your business, whether it's building an audience of potential clients or a network of affiliates to help promote your business. The value of relationships to your business is enormous. It's the difference between success and failure right there. So building relationships is something that's really important. Trusting your instincts is another trait that is really helpful for entrepreneurs to have. And as I've said, this is something that I've had to learn in the last 3.5 years since I started my business. I wasn't a confident person when I was in corporate, and I was aware of that and frustrated at myself for not being more confident. But paradoxically, in a way, I think the thing that has built my confidence the most has just been jumping off that cliff and being forced to step up and be the boss of my own business. And it's been so freeing to stop second guessing myself. And linked to that, giving yourself permission to make your own decisions is a hugely liberating thing for an entrepreneur. It's been something that's affected my work, my life, my parenting. In my 20s and even my early 30s, I was so afraid to do things differently to the people around me. I could have quit my corporate career several years sooner than I actually did and potentially not gone through burnout, but no one gave me permission to do that, so I pushed on and pushed on until I hit burnout and my hand was forced. It was such a great thing for me to give up that career, because I've really discovered myself since that point and learned all of the things that I'm talking about today. Also, as a parent, I found it really hard to stop breastfeeding my first baby because I felt so much pressure from NCT and health visitors, and no one else I knew was stopping. But it really wasn't working, and my baby wasn't putting on weight. And I knew the whole time that I was hating it. He wasn't growing, he was crying with hunger all the time. But I was waiting for someone to say it was okay for me to stop breastfeeding. And it did me so much good to have that experience, and thankfully he thrived so much on formula feeding and has been a really happy, healthy boy since. And it gave me that confidence as a mum to make my own parenting decisions, to the point that I didn't even take maternity leave when my second son was born, because I didn't want to, and by that point I was confident enough to actually make a decision that worked for me without having the permission of people around me. And during that time I also gave myself permission to start a business, and it's a dynamic that just continues throughout the life of your business. It's been integral to my recovery from burnout because I have to be the judge of my energy levels, which means it's okay to say no, even if from the outside there's no obvious reason why I'm saying no. And it also feels pretty amazing to have the confidence to make big decisions in your own life. Connected to this is the ability to run at your own pace. So in a corporate workplace, obviously so much of the culture is based around fitting in and doing the same as everyone else. And like I've been saying, that's never really suited me. It doesn't come naturally to me. But it's been such a great trait to have as an entrepreneur, because when we're new to business, we can spend so much time feeling completely terrified by the scale of things that other men and women are doing in their businesses. Every post you see on social media or sales email you receive in your inbox can just make you feel so small and like you're so far behind everyone else, and you should be doing it all faster and better and making it look easier. But if you can get used to running your own race and staying in your own lane, that is such a great thing for your sanity and for your business, because we're not business owners in relation to other people. It's not a race. And even if you feel like you're surrounded by competitors, you actually don't have to see them that way. So don't be afraid to run at your own pace. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And what matters is forward progress, even if it feels like you're the only person running your stretch of the road. It's a two-way thing really, because something I find more now is that I have an idea to do something and it feels a bit intimidating because there actually aren't many other people out there doing the same thing. There's a certain safety in numbers, isn't there? But it's just as important to run at your own pace at a more advanced stage of your business because, and again, we're back to leadership, whether you need to go slow for a season or you're zooming ahead and it feels like you're a bit out in the wilderness, it's a huge encouragement to your audience if you're out there in front of them and you're able to show them the way forward. I think the last thing is that the willingness to be authentically you in your business is a brilliant trait for any entrepreneur building a personal brand, because my experience of being in corporate is that I consistently felt that I needed to be someone else and less myself in order to fit in, and I brought that with me into my business. When I first started out, I was really focused on what do I need to say in order to attract the right clients, and I really found that I was trying so hard to use all the right words and follow the right formula, but at that point it just wasn't getting results at all. And what I found was when I scrapped that and I just started talking about things I felt really passionately about, things that weren't trending and that no one else was really saying, it felt like I was massively going out on a limb. But I remember I published a blog post about the coaching pyramid, which is this whole idea about how the online business coaching thing of starting a business, teaching other people how to start a business, and coaches coaching coaches to be coaches, and all the things that I'd really struggled against when I started my business. I published this blog post that was the first time I'd been brave enough to have a real opinion about something and be the first person to say it. And someone applied to work with me right off the back of that post. I started a mastermind when it wasn't trendy to do it, when everyone else was saying you could either work with someone one-to-one or do a group program, but no one was really combining those things. But I felt like for my audience, that was something that could really add a lot of value, so I just did it. And it's funny because now you can't do anything without falling over someone who's talking about the mastermind they've just launched. But that's what happens when you stop following the crowd and start leading. See what I mean about leadership, by the way? It really is the linchpin to this whole discussion. People are just drawn to you in a completely different way when you're speaking with authenticity and being yourself. I was so stunned when I realised that about my business. Firstly, because it's the first time I think I had really felt I could say these things without a massive need for a filter. But also because it's just so obvious, isn't it? Everyone around me was saying, be yourself, talk with your voice. But until I started doing it, I just didn't really understand what that meant. So I hope you found this a helpful topic of discussion. It's something that I'm really passionate about because when I look back over the last 10 years, or actually the last 20 years of my life, I see these things in place so clearly now in a way that I just couldn't at the time. And it makes me so glad that I did take the risk and start my business. And it really makes so much sense of why I was so discontent in corporate versus how fulfilled I am now. And part of me really kicks against that whole narrative of I heart my life and now I'm a coach, I just have the perfect everything. But actually, I can really see how much good it's done me to find this way of working that I have now, which is hilarious because that wasn't something I was aware of at the time that I started my business at all. So I'd love to know whether you feel the same. I know that a lot of ladies listening have had a similar experience to me of finding that they're just not really a good fit for corporate, which is funny in a way, isn't it? Because for so many of us, corporate is the default expectation we place on ourselves when we're at school or at university. But if you've had health issues or mental health issues like I did, or just found that you can't seem to settle in a corporate role without feeling really frustrated, or like you're constantly deadening yourself in order to be someone that in your heart of hearts you know you're just not, it's actually pretty encouraging to reflect back and just realise that you were an entrepreneur all along. You're not weird, there's nothing wrong with you, you're just a unicorn. You were never meant to fit into that little box, and you get so much more from life when you reject that premise. So here's to embracing the traits that make you a terrible employee but an excellent entrepreneur. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. You've been listening to the Business Club for Grown-Ups podcast with Jessica Fearnley. To find out more, visit thebusinessclubforgrownups.com.